Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Rethinking Digital Transformation in Education, Inclusion as an Ongoing Process in Latin America and the Caribbean. In the name of the UNESCO office in Santiago and in coordination with the IIEP for Latin America and the Caribbean, we want to welcome you and thank you for being with us in this space for exchange and reflections. This is part of the Regional Alliance for the Transformation and Innovation in Education, RT. We also have the support of Huawei, and this is supposed to strengthen international cooperation and the capabilities of the uh, educational systems to advance to an inclusive and quality education. Digital transformation has been redefining educational systems, and we have better tools to follow our students' trajectories, possibilities of dealing with data and collaboration. But these opportunities, they are not automatic. We know that technologies can also deepen inequalities if they are not designed, implemented, and evaluated on the basis of rights and equity. We have before wondered what happens when we look at AI from the lens of equality. Now we want to think about how to implement um, digital information in an inclusive way from public policies. So this cannot be something made after the implementation. It has to be from the start, from the get-go, from the design of policies and implementation and assessment in teacher training, in data governance, and in the capability of adjusting decisions after evidence and real contexts. Today, we're going to have three very important voices in our region to talk about this, the implementation of policies in educational planning, international evidence about equity and rights, and citizenship ethics and in contexts that are affected by emerging technologies and AI. Now, I will give the floor to my colleague, Fernando Salvatierra from IIEP UNESCO, to present our dynamics and our guests, our panelists. Thank you so much, Amparo. As you were saying, this seminar aims at being different from the previous encounter where we were wondering about AI in terms of inclusion, but now we're wondering how we can have this transformation be done in an adaptive and inclusive way and sustained in educational systems that are complex and unequal as we have in the city, in this region. The first part is going to be about adaptive implementation, how we can go from very well policies, design policies to actual practices that can be adapted to the context. We have always been talking about how the gap between the design and the implementation has affected our educational systems. The second block is going to be about access, equity, and evidence. And this is going to be very much based on the GEM report 2026, which starts this, it's on our way to 2030, and it shows that access, equity, conclusion of trajectories, and the distribution of resources are crucial to think about education in an AI era. And the third is citizenship, ethics, and sustainability, because digital transformation is not only about platforms and infrastructure and AI, it is also about what citizenship capabilities, what democratic capabilities, what critical and ethical capabilities we need to form citizens and to make be part of these societies. So now we're going to have Alejandra Cardini, who is the head of the IIP UNESCO for Latin America and the Caribbean, Lara Stepanovic, who is an official in the GEM report, and Christian Bravo, who is an adjunct coordinator of education for sustainable development and citizenship in UNESCO Santiago. As all of you who have been in the RT meetings know, you will have a main intervention of for 5 minutes. We will request panelists to be very strict with times. Then a comment or another question from a colleague and a closing moment. And then in the end, we will have an open conversation. So now I will give the floor back to Amparo to start our first block. Thank you so much, Fernando. Let's start with our first block, implementing inclusive digital policies in complex systems. And we are inviting our first panelist, Alejandra Cardini. Ale, how lovely to see you. I'd like to start with you, thinking about the gap between policies and practice. In digital transformation in education, we see many policies with beautiful goals of equity, inclusion, innovation. But these policies not always can change what actually happens in schools, in classrooms, or in our students' trajectories. Within the idea of adaptive implementation, where we're trying to reduce this gap between policy and practice, and based on the IIP's experience, what does it mean to implement inclusive digital policies in complex and unequal systems? And how can states move from good regulatory and technological designs to processes that learn, adjust, and sustain inclusion in practice? Please, Ali. Thank you so much, Amparo, for your challenging question. It's lovely to be with Laura, Kristen, Fernanda, and all of the over 300 people who are here. Well, I believe the first idea is that digital inclusion is not something that is decreed from the top down. It's something that has to be implemented, which means we can have very well designed policies and educational plans. We can have good frameworks. We can have platforms. We can have ambitious strategies regarding, for example, the challenge of AI. But the deciding point is what actually happens when these decisions, which are made in documents, when they reach the schools, the territories, the teachers, and the students. And this is a very important question for IIP UNESCO, and we can see it very clearly in our half-term strategy where we have been emphasizing this great challenge of educational reform, which is this distance between policies and practice, between planning and action. And oftentimes the challenges are not only about the design and the diagnostics in this policy, but the possibilities or uh, impossibilities of this policy reaching the territory. And this is particularly important when we talk about digital transformation and inclusion, because we're talking about very fast and very uncertain changes that the educational system has to think about. And these educational systems are very different from each other and very unequal in the region. So the approach of adaptive implementation, which is our first topic here, is so important because we're all the time thinking that it's not just about putting a plan into practice. Implementing implies learning through the process, anticipating, developing capabilities to make these plans effective. It implies listening to the actors, having feedback mechanisms, watching and observing data and evidence, and we're going to see it very clearly with the GEM report and everything it brings into into the discussion, and adjusting decisions to respond to these contexts. In this sense, this is very much in line with what is the situational planning in Latin America and the Caribbean. We understand that policies don't just get deployed, but they are implemented in scenarios with different actors, capabilities, conflicts, opportunities, and oftentimes urgencies. So there are four things to be taken into account for a digital policy to be inclusive. And these are general conditions. And then we can continue talking about this. First is to have situational diagnosis that are based in disaggregated data that can allow us to understand what actually is going on in each school, who is being left behind, and this is going to be the input for the decisions. The second is to strengthen the state's capabilities, and not only strengthening them in the central level, in the ministries, um, but also in the intermediate levels, which are the ones that connect these decisions that are taken in a central power with what actually happens in the schools. So this governance, this intermediate governance, has to be especially supported, and it's oftentimes left aside in the policy decisions. Third is to generate monitoring and constant adjustment in during the implementation. So getting feedback and being able to adjust things over time. And fourth, and this is what Amparo was saying, which is to make sure that inclusion is included in all of the fronts of this educational policy: curriculum, teacher training, accessibility, data governance, the use of technologies. And to close, I would just like to emphasize that to think about digital transformation in with a lens of inclusion, no one can be left behind. But we also have to understand that for this to be true, it's important that we have capabilities to implement, evidence to adjust decisions, and continuous learning. Thank you so much, Ale. And now we're going to give the floor to Laura to comment this first intervention. Thank you, Lara, and thank you, Alejandra, for your intervention. You mentioned a few topics that mean are very important: disaggregated data, strengthening capabilities, monitoring. Um, just going back to the GEM report in 2023, which was about technology and education, we talked about a few of these points. But I think one of the most important ones that we mentioned is that we have to leave behind the idea that we have to bring technologies and devices to the classrooms. We need a much more holistic outlook. We need reforms that we can implement, that we can actually see their impact. And for that, I think technology and digital transformation has to be seen from four different angles. So I would like to just start um, to recall what we recommended in 2023, which was four questions. First is this use of technology appropriate for the context, the local and national context? Because what works in one country may not work in another. What works in a public school may not work in a private school, and vice versa. Second, in terms of equity, does this technology exclude any students? So we have to make sure that all of our policies that we want to implement include all of the students, including students with special needs. is this technology scalable? Can it actually be taken to a more local or even national or even regional level? And lastly, is this sort of technology sustainable? And when we talk about sustainability, we're thinking of two types of sustainability: resources. So, can we still keep implementing these policies with the resources that we can have in terms of maintenance and all? And a long-term outlook, also the environmental sustainability, because we often um, go to talk about technology, but we forget about the environment. So this just to recall these four recommendations, and I will go back to them in my next intervention. And behind all of this is the disaggregated data and the monitoring, because without data and evidence, no decisions can be made. Thank you so much, Laura. This is very relevant to bring back these conclusions from the GEM report in 2023. So now I would like to invite Ali to comment on your comment. Thank you. Um, I will go back to what Laura was saying. It's crucial to have information that allows us to see beyond access and connectivity. And in this sense, or to reach this adaptive implementation, a very good example of the use of evidence is everything that has to do with the early alert systems, which is not only knowing who's having access, but also knowing how are they going, at which moment they're falling behind. So all of this information that is focused on a specific school, which is disaggregated by territory, gender, capabilities, human mobility, languages, and so many other dimensions. This is what allows us to make decisions in the educational system that will have actually effective impact on our students. So monitoring is not just a control or a control mechanism. It's a tool of institutional learning that may sustain this process. Excellent, Alejandra. Thank you so much for the completeness of your intervention. And now I'll give the floor to Fernanda to move on to the second block. Thank you, Amparo and colleagues. This was a wonderful way to start this meeting. And it frames the questions that we were expecting to approach um, in this event. So now this second block is more about access, equity, and evidence with the lessons from the GEM report 2026. Laura will have the main intervention and Christian Bravo will react. I will go to the point. The GEM report 2026 focuses on access and equity and this countdown to 2030, right? And the report shows that we're still very far from accomplishing many of the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals. The conclusion of secondary school, these are still things that are still behind, not only here, but everywhere. So, what lessons does the report give us to rethink the digital transformation in education, and how can the policies avoid measuring only connectivity or platform access rather than the actual effects on educational trajectories in learning and equity and participation? So, Laura, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Fer. This is a very relevant question. Our report is 500 pages long, so it's very difficult to summarize it in 5 minutes, but I will try to make the best. So, looking at our history, the GEM report is following up on the SDG 4 in each of the indicators. And we follow up on the progress of each indicator. In 2023, we did the technology report, which was the first time we placed focus on this topic. But we have always thought about technology and digital transformation as cross-cutting topic in educational systems. For 2026, we changed things a little bit, and we started with this countdown to 2030 because the deadline is coming up and we have to see what we have reached. We have to celebrate the countries that have achieved changes, but we also have to look at what we have and what we have not achieved. And this also has to do with having a more critical view about different tools such as technology to improve access and equity in our educational systems. So our first report was about access and equity. We will issue another one next year about learning quality. And in 2028, it will be about relevance, about how education relates to the other SDGs. And the idea is that these three reports become the basis of a framework for a monitoring framework for the 2030 agenda. Technology is a little bit less present in this year's, which is access and equity, but the next 2 years we will focus on that, on technology again, about the opportunities that technology brings, but also the challenges that it poses. A few very specific data. We have 273 million children and teenagers in school age, but we also have a decrease in the number of enrolled students. We have many difficulties in access in all of the levels. And we also see that in spite of all of the challenges globally, we have had many reasons to celebrate. Our report, for those of you who don't know it, has 5 indications. So participation in early education, enrollment in different levels, and gender parity. So we look 25 in over the past 25 years and see what changes have been implemented and which lessons can be learned for a new agenda. This is very important for me, and I think it's really important in the 2023 report. We also mentioned that technology changes so quickly and we don't have the opportunity to take a step back like we're doing with the other indicators that have had monitoring systems in place for a long time, and we have had the opportunity to measure its impact. But this idea of looking back and see what worked and what didn't is very important, and especially to make recommendations. For this report, we did case studies from 4 countries: Chile in higher education, in Trinidad and Tobago about gender parity, in Bolivia about equality, and Costa Rica about the number of children in schools. In them, we don't have the focus in digital transformation, but we do have this idea of looking back and trying to improve access and equity. Our report believes that not all countries start from the same point. When we started with the agenda, not all countries were on the same moment and the same level about technology, access, equity, digital parity. So we try to acknowledge the improvement of each country. And for example, Colombia didn't start from the same point then as the UK or El Salvador. So talking about national goals and national aspirations is very important. I know I have very little time, so just to bring 5 points. First, we know that not all countries will achieve access to for all by 2030, but that doesn't mean a total failure. We are usually pessimistic, but we're not going that bad. We have changed our educational systems with this focus on in access and inclusion and equity, and technology has helped a lot. It has generated amazing improvements for people with special needs and with disabilities and with people in different mobility situations, and for people who live in more remote areas. But of course, we also have to assess the negative side of technology. We are probably not going to achieve the conclusion in higher education rates. We would need to reach 200, the year 2105 to achieve that. But technology can help improve this if we have reforms that are more holistic, thinking about state capabilities, data and monitoring, that is not just throwing technology there, but just making sure that it's actually supporting our educational systems. And two more topics. Yes. To define progress, we have to rethink the way we measure data, and we can make conclusions, but they have to be contextualized, and the trajectories of each countries and territories are very, very important and cannot be disregarded. Thank you. Thank you, Laura, for your first intervention. We're sharing the link to the report, which is of course impossible to summarize in 5 minutes, but this is also a place where we can discuss this. So many people were requesting it, and now we have it. Now, Christian, in 2 minutes, just comment on Laura's presentation and bring your maybe you can ask something again, and then Laura will have 2 minutes to reply. Thank you so much, Fernando. This is a huge challenge to try to summarize all of this and the different information that is in the report in 5 minutes. But there's something that seems very relevant, which is the 273 million school children who are not in school. Children who are not in school. We often forget about this, but 160 million children had their education in the pandemic, which is when we had the rise of technology in education. So it's interesting to think that in that moment when we had this the situation, we had a huge number of children who left school. So it's very interesting, the itinerary of the several reports that are going to be published, because it allows us to see not only where we are, but where we want to go. Technology poses challenges, and this is something that I will mention later, which go beyond access. It's not about the device, but technology entering the schools, maybe a tech 2.0. So access must translate into more equity. And this makes us think that this equity means people having capabilities of participating in a critical manner in society. So this is what I'd like to leave as a message. And also I'd like to ask how you see this, the follow-up of these countries after 2030, because we understand that reaching agreements and learning from each other is very important, but what could be an orientation for policies that I'd like to hear from you, Laura? Thank you. Thank you so much, Christian. Yes, they are very, very important topics. I think the difficulty that we have is a balance between what we can measure and the recommendation in this more holistic and humane outlook. We have an indicator about digital transformation, which measures how schools are connected to the internet. And it measures the connectivity, but we say very often that connectivity is not enough. It's not just about knowing how many schools are connected, but unfortunately, to have for now, this is the only data that we have. We also have a youth participation, for example, because this is a very difficult indicator what is meaningful participation. So I think it's more or less the same that happens with digital transformation. Going back to what Alejandra said at the beginning, to have a transformation, real transformation, it's not just about connectivity, but we have to start from somewhere. So it's important to have uh, base data and then go to into policies and then the analysis, and we have to use a resource that we have, which is called peer, which gives us an analysis of policies all over the world regarding technology and digital transformation, and this helps us um, uh, bring it to and coordinate it with the data that we can collect. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Christian. I think Laura allows us to see where we are right now and what we have to do after the Agenda 2030. So I think the GEM report has been making a great contribution, and it's very interesting, the series that you're planning. And now let's go to the third block. I'll give the floor to my colleague Amparo. Thank you, Fed. And for the third block, in citizenship, ethics, and AI for inclusive and sustainable digital transformation, we're going to invite our colleague Christian Bravo. Christian, now I would like you to help us widen our view. We have talked about implementation, evidence, access, data, and equity. But the digital transformation in education now supposes a question about the ends of education, which capabilities we want to strengthen, what citizenship do we want to drive, and how can we make sure that the technology helps achieve more democratic society. So how should we think about digital transformation and particularly artificial intelligence so that it's not just a technological agenda, but an ethical, civic, and inclusive agenda that is aimed at democratic coexistence, diversity, sustainability, and the common good. Thank you so much, Christian, and thank you, my colleagues before me, for your presentations. As I mentioned just now, I would like to reinforce that when we talk about technology, AI in education, we're not just talking about what tools or platforms to use, but why we need or why we want AI in education. Because digital transformation is not just about technology, it's an educational, citizenship, civic, and ethical initiative. So it's not just bringing technology to class, but asking ourselves what types of citizens do we want to form, we want to raise in our schools, and what type of society do we want in a world that is more and more dominated by algorithms with the recommendations of everything that we do in life. And this is very clear in the UNESCO recommendation, which is an updating of the recommendation in 1974, which is about the purpose of education. It has to prepare people, not only as a human capital, but people who can actually take responsible actions in complex topics that can live in democracy, contribute for a sustainable development. And this is a challenge that we see more and more in the digital space. Even though digitalization improves the access to knowledge, but we still see inequalities on a daily basis, which has to do with access, of course, but also with the great circulation of hate speech, disinformation, misinformation, exposure to AI manipulated content, and people are not even aware of that. So when we talk about the world as a whole, digital transformation means talking about digital social justice. We have to think about uh, technological or digital literacy. We have worked with development of competences to assess information, to assess sources, to produce content in an ethical way. But when AI came, the scale of this went up. So it's not just about is this information correct or not, or true or not. We also have to understand who produced it, what interests are behind it, what data is used to train these models. So, what voices are being left behind, and also the environmental impact, because many of us have our avatar with a water consumption of maybe like 2 3 days in a large city. We don't understand the scale of the use of natural resources for by AI. This also came up in Colombia last year, and which is mediatic and informational literacy. It's an initiative that we tried to, that was implemented in Colombia, which is the idea of showing people how to have a critical citizenship. So we don't have to form just raise people who will understand technology, but we have to uh, raise people that understand what's behind all this. UNESCO gave a great step in 2024 with the competence frameworks for AI for teachers and students. And they're not so much about how people understand um, models of AI, but how asking how AI can strengthen human agency, rights, and learning. So teachers are now the back to the center of the conversation. AI cannot displace teacher. It has to be a concrete exercise in citizenship. And the framework for students is so to understand how students can develop their citizenship, understand the results of AI, understand what's inside and what's left outside of these databases. So there are many things going on. Many schools right now, I see my time's up, but they're trying to see if they should um, prohibit the use of AI, but it has more to do with the fact that these are tools for, they have to be tools for critical thinking. So, for example, using an answer from AI to analyze in class, this can be a very powerful exercise in critical thinking. So for me, I think this is more or less, it's not just about learning to live with AI, but understanding that we have to, it's an invitation to rethink education without forgetting that the social contract is, the education is something that makes us learn together. Thank you, Christian. You actually enhanced our view very much. And we want to invite Alejandra to comment on this first intervention. Yes, Christian, I think you've shed light on the fact that digital transformation cannot just be about technical or technological issues, and that every technological decision is also a pedagogical decision and a citizenship decision and an ethical decision in a long term. And I wonder how we can um, bring these ideas of citizenship, sustainability, democratic society, participation uh, in planning of concrete public policies, things that we can actually do in classrooms. And I think this brings something that you actually said, which is going back to thinking about the critical things of educational policy, curriculum, teacher training, this definition of how to put into practice these frameworks for AI, for students, for teachers, for ministry employees? What criteria of adoption do we need? How can we actually protect sensitive data? How can we generate participation mechanisms in the communities? And I was thinking that one of the keys is to strengthen capabilities in different levels of the system. Of course, technical teams that can think about how to regulate this, how to bring this into practice, how to um, guide decisions in the use of technology, and how the intermediate levels need these tools to be able to follow up on these schools. And the schools need the time and training and support to be able to use these tools in a pedagogically meaningful and a critical and responsible and ethical way. So the need that you posed of not separating the agenda of digital transformation and AI, particularly from the citizenship agenda, is crucial to frame everything else that we have been talking about the planning and the implementation of policies and the use of and the protection of data for decision making. Thank you so much, Ale. You help us bring this to a more concrete idea of integrity and responsibility in all of the levels. And now I want to give the floor back to Christian so that he can close his intervention. Thank you so much, Amparo, and thank you so much, Alejandra, for your intervention. I think that what you're saying is crucial. How can we make it a virtuous circle? How can the experience of implementation feed back to the processes of public policy design? And we haven't done this. We don't know how to do that because we are not used to generating so much evidence. But the reality is intersectional. It's not the same to be an indigenous woman or a person with disabilities or a person who's queer. And these are things that impact our ability to learn. Two children with access to the same device can have absolutely different learning experiences regarding to where they live, who they relate to, who they live with, what cultural capital they can have. So there are several conversations here. And the most important is how we can can drive this articulation of those who make decisions and who create programs, and the teachers and the students who are the ones who are living this day by day. And this is what is going to lead to changes in our society. Thank you. Thank you, Alejandra. Thank you, Chris. And now we're going to our next phase. Fernando, you have the floor. Wow, I'm so glad we were able to reach the questions part because we never have time to. And the idea is to also connect to things that have been coming up in the chat. And so I will start with a juicy comment by Luis Ramon Ibanez, who invites us not to just stay in the situational diagnostics, responding to Alejandra. Ruby Estela Mendoza mentions two main challenges for the region, which are inequality and desertion. And so the question is very concrete. If we think about digital transformation in the era of AI in an inclusive and adaptive implementation, what would be the main risk for our region? To design policies that don't reach the schools, or to measure indicators that don't show the reality, or to include the communities in decisions? Alejandra, from the perspective of the planning, what do we have to do so we don't just stay in the diagnostic and we move on to concrete changes? And then I will go to Laura about the GEM report. What evidence do we need to see if these changes are actually reducing the inequalities? You have 1 minute each. I love the question. I think it's very challenging. And I think that the key is implementation, how to use information to implement. And one very good example was the discussion of the GEM report about the use of cell phones in 2022, 2023, and many countries started actually thinking about this of something that was so normalized, and they started regulating, and then this very, very interesting mechanism came up, and different countries reacted to this information and with something that actually have had a lot of impact in the school. So this is a very good example of how not to just stay in the diagnostics. Ah, you took my example. Oh, I'm sorry. Because when we talk about impact and looking at technologies from a different perspective, the prohibition of using cell phones is one of the most important examples. But talking about risks, I think measuring indicators, not all indicators show the real inequalities. Some of them don't show exactly who's being affected. We don't know if connectivity is good, if teachers are being trained, if the parents have digital competences based on digital citizenship. So we sometimes forget all of this ecosystem and we just focus on one piece of data, but we don't see everything that's around. So I think the GEM report for this year helps us put into perspective that the indicators about connectivity are just one, but we have to see where educational systems are regarding the rest of the indicators. And for us, the most important thing is that technology is and will continue to be, from the radio to AI, one tool that can help educational systems advance, but they always have to have the interest of the best interest of students at the core. Thank you, Laura. Amparo, you can go. So I would like to bring two more questions from the chat. The first is from Luisa Espina, and she mentioned a very interesting tool by UNICEF to follow up on connectivity in schools, which is integrating this monitoring of uh, the infrastructure and connectivity and devices and all. But Luisa also mentioned that connectivity is enables other things such as um, teacher training and the use of technology. Carolina also Palma also said that uh, technology is a tool for and access to real inclusion. So we have to ask what other indicators and decisions we need to understand if the technologies are actually having a real impact. So I would like to ask Laura to tell us from the Gen Report perspective how we can avoid digital policies to measure only access and connectivity and actually move to indicators that show real qualitative effects. And Kristen as well, uh, thinking about what Eric and Carla were mentioning about ethical use of AI. How can educational systems translate these capabilities into concrete experiences of democratic living and citizenship. So how can we measure these advancements and these progresses in digital citizenship? And I will also ask Alejandra in terms of planning and implementation, how all of this can be um, integrated in a cycle of adjustments so that the policy has real effects in inclusion. So this is my proposal for each one of you, and thank you so much. Laura, you can start. Thank you so much, Amparo. Going back to the topics that I was mentioning, I think technology is very clear. It's much more than connectivity. So looking at the different indicators, we can have an idea of where we are and if we have conditions for that. If we take gender parity, for example, and the access to digital education, we see that in 2023, 81% of men had cell phones and 75% of women. Um, and the world, 244 million women fewer than men use internet. But we can also think about social norms, so behaviors. And for example, our report says that in Pakistan, many women who didn't have a cell phone said they didn't have the approval of their families to have a cell phone. So, how can we approach this in terms of monitoring and data? I think we need to collect systematically disaggregated data by gender, by sex, or in terms of um, access to device, frequency of use, and complement this with information about attitudes regarding the device so we can understand which are the barriers that go beyond access. Thank you so much, Laura. Now let's move on to Christian. Thank you, Amparo, and thank you, Laura, because you gave me a good start for one thing I wanted to say. Worldwide, in the world, only 18% of the people who are being part of the technological evolution are women. So it's not just about parity in access. It has to do a design. It's a design problem. There's not enough participation and representation of women in the design of these technologies. And this can be a pedagogical opportunity. So we can follow up on students' processes and critical thinking about what AI does not represent or what it's over-representing. So in terms of measuring, this is much more complex. As Laura was saying, how can we measure youth commitment or meaningful participation? There are a few exercises. For example, uh, attitude indicators, which is not just academic development. So we could maybe explore something into that. There are activities that can be done, for example, systematization and recuperation of indigenous languages. So the problem is not the use of the tool, but it's how to find transformative opportunities so we don't forget that we're actually raising people. We cannot forget that. Thank you, Chris. Very inspiring. And now let's close with Ali. Thank you for your question about the use of information and the feedback of this use for policies. I'd like to bring back the two examples that I brought. One is the information of the GEM report about the use of cell phones and everything that it generated in countries and the early alert systems, because this is a very concrete example and very strong in our region of a use of information that feeds back and contemplates all of the levels of governance. So there's very, very concrete results about the trajectory and the and how students are going through school. And it has to do with the way countries are using this to improve education and inclusion. Thank you. Thank you, Fernando. Yes, I think it's beautiful to have such a to see this exchange between you or among you. And now we have to go to the conclusion. So we have to maybe bring other ideas from the chat. Rosa Funes said, technology without an educational purpose is only a tool. Diana from Colombia also mentioned the digital literacy with human rights. Adriana talked about disinformation, democracy, and peace culture. And Eusebio said, it's not about connecting, it's the idea to connect. So, with all of the things that we talked today, I would like to propose to Amparo that we ask from each one of you a very, very brief idea of about what's the most important condition for the digital transformation, for this to be inclusive, to have an educational purpose, and to be sustained as a continuous process in the region. So each one of you, please respond to this from your own standpoint. Final messages. Well, if I had to say just one condition, I would say it's about building state capabilities that are lasting and that can be adaptive, so that can bring this transformation in an inclusive way. So everything that has to do with bringing inclusion into the policies cannot be just in this just a statement in the policy. It has to be cross-cutting, and it has to be in the monitoring, in the assessment, and in the adaptation. And this is the only way that all of the transformation that we discussed also in the latest seminar, that we will be able to build a more equitable agenda. Now, Laura, I think I would focus on technology that is human and that focuses on students and teachers in the center. We often forget this, but this is the most important thing. But also with the lens of equity, we cannot forget that some technology oftentimes leaves people behind. And we also have to ensure that technology does not discriminate against anyone uh, by itself. So the access to resources has to be for all, and we have to have training and capability strengthening for everyone to be able to use it effectively. And so we can see this improvements in learning results as well. Christian? Well, for me, it would be to invite people who are implementing policies. So we are not saying that learning results are not important, but how can we use this to work with things that promote justice, democracy, and a better relationship between people? So some things have to do with um, citizenship to include people, AI, well, so many tools. For example, AI can help with the preservation of indigenous languages, and we can bring this into the curriculum. So let's look at the opportunities in the curriculum and use the AI to help with this. Excellent. Thank you so much, Alejandra, Laura, and Christian, for such an enriching conversation, for helping us in this day. So we're thinking about digital transformation understood as a process that is continuous. It's not just one intervention. It requires diagnostics, implementation, adaptation, disaggregated data, policies, teacher training, participation, ethical criteria, and the capacity or ability to adjust, make adjustments. also AI and other technologies can open opportunities that are important to follow up on students' trajectories to increase sustainability, accessibility, strengthening and improving learning experiences. But these opportunities only come to life if the technologies are guided by right to education, equity, diversity, citizenship, and the common good. We thank you all for being with us in this seminar, and we hope that this conversation helps to keep building a very inclusive, equitable, democratic, and sustainable digital transformation in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I hope that we can keep meeting in this space, building cooperation and maybe even educational integration in our region. Firm, you can close. Thank you, Amparo. I'd just like to emphasize that inclusion is not one stage of digital transformation. It's the one criterion that has to guide the whole process from the design, implementation and the adjustment. So thank you, Alejandra, Lara, Christian, for being here. It has been very enriching. And I think for all of the participants from RT and all of the guests here, I think this has been a very, very fruitful reflection space. And now we forgot in the last meeting, but Fede is going to help us coordinating the technical part of this event. And you will see now a button that will actually ask you to open your camera so we can have a photo. So, Fede, can you tell us what the process is like? I can do it otherwise. No, it's fine. Um, so we're going to have a question. Just going to do a screenshot. So turn your camera on, smile, wave, and thank you so much because this is a space where we can actually see this regional alliance that we have and that shows how rich these spaces are. So let's just wave to the camera and now let's end the public event. And now we will continue with a closed event for the ones that are working in the course of RT. And those who are part of the course, please stay in this link. And those who are not, thank you so much. And thank you for our interpreters, as always, impeccable. Thank you if we made you rush a little bit. And now we'll have a short break and we will go to our breakout rooms with our work teams. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.